Oh my god! Yo guys, what is up? Max for Diablo 4 video, and today we're going over my Pulverize guide for Season 4. Now, Pulverize was just buffed massively in the most recent patch, receiving tons of quality of life and damage increases, and now we've got it hitting for 500 million on bosses, and that's in just a day of gearing. The highest tier of Pulverize clear right now in the pits is 127, and just in a day of playing this build, I'm already cleared at 110, and plan on pushing the build even further. But today I want to explain what I'm using on Pulverize, and also the ways to improve its damage so much. I hope you enjoy the guide. Let's get right into it. So the very first thing that I want to talk about is the mechanics of scaling Pulverize to deal the most damage. And Pulverize is an overpower ability. We're going to get the most damage by increasing its overpower damage. And there's a lot of ways to do that. Obviously, percent increases to your overpower damage are great. All the multipliers are going to be great. But the one thing that I really want to mention is max life. Now, if we go to our actual overpower damage, it's going to give us kind of a false calculation in the tooltip. So right now it says that my overpower damage is 2,574, right? So if we overpower, we're going to get a lot of additive damage. Overpower also has an inherent multiplier. This is up to 50% multiplier when we're at max life, meaning that if we're at like half health when we overpower, we're only going to get a 25% multiplier on that damage, versus if we're at max life or we're full health or healthy, we're going to get a 50% damage multiplier. So one of the most important things about being doing high damage on this build is actually just building some survivability. Survivability on this build does increase our damage, and that also factors into max life. Now, this overpower reads that the overpower is further increased at the moment of impact based on your max life and fortify amount. Now, what this actually means is this flat overpower number that it's giving me is not factoring in the moment of impact of the damage, which takes into account our max life and our fortify amount. Now, the formula for this can be found on max roll if you want to look further into it, and it's max life minus base life over base life. Our base life will always be the same on any character that's a Druid at level 100 is 7959, and that's additive to your amount of health that you have fortified divided by your base life. So I just kind of want to give you an example here to what this all means. So right now, if I am at 100,000 HP on this build, which we can get to, if I'm at 100,000 HP and I'm at full health when I do my overpower, I'm going to get 1,268 additive overpower damage. So we're going from that like 2,500 and adding another 1,000% additive to it. If I'm only at 50,000 HP at my max life, I'm only going to get a 633% additive to it. So the difference between having 100,000 HP and having 50,000 HP is about 635% additive damage to our overpower. So one thing to note is when you're gearing out this build and you're trying to scale up your damage a lot, you want to get as much health as you can. Greater affixes to health are really important because they're going to add a ton of damage and a ton of survivability. And the healthier we are on this build, not only do we get more additive overpower, but the healthier we're also going to get a multiplier. And so that is one of the big ways to scale our overpower damage. Another thing that's pretty important to take into account is willpower. Willpower is multiplicative by increasing our skill damage, but it also contributes to the overpower damage that we're going to get. So the more willpower you have, the more increase to overpower you get, and the more skill damage you get. All of this is just to say that you're going to want lots of health and lots of willpower on this build, something that I'm currently lacking a bit on my personal spec. That's only because I've only been playing this build for a day and don't have the best items, but we're already clearing 110s on the setup. Now that we've kind of gone over some of the mechanics of Pulverize, let's get into the gear and the skill tree and the itemization and so on and so forth. Now, I think the best in slot helmet is the Harlequin crest for this build. It does give you 20% flat DR, which is amazing. The +4 ranks to your skills is great. And the resource generation is not something to be overlooked. Resource generation goes dummy hard on this build. We're going to be wanting to spam out our Pulverize as much as possible. Now, the Godslayer helm is also a great choice for this build. It will give you a higher damage with Pulverize if you're timing it correctly. And if you're farming lower tiers, you can use the Godslayer and like time it with a guaranteed overpower to get some ridiculous damage, and you will see higher numbers and like more like one shots with the Godslayer helm. However, I think for pit pushing, the crest is just better. It's got the DR, it's got tons of max life, which once again is damage for us, and it's got the plus ranks to our skills, and you're not going to be one-shotting bosses in the pit that are over like 120, 110. You're going to be there for a while, and the damage for this is up a fourth of the amount of time that Harlequin damage is up. So I think the Shaco is the best in slot helmet for this build if you can get it. Obviously, if you don't have it, rock a Godslayer. It definitely also helps with speed clearing for those fast group ups. Next up on your chest piece, we're using Insatiable Fury. Insatiable Fury isn't a must-have for this build. If you are having trouble with spirit, a spirit per second chest piece with willpower and max life goes really great on this build. You can also use the ballistic aspect, which gives you +2 ranks to your earth skills when you have fortify. So you're getting +2 ranks, you're getting willpower, you're getting max health, and I think the damage is relatively similar with an Insatiable Fury chest piece and a non-Insatiable Fury chest piece. I use something like this at the moment. I use a willpower, max life, armor, max life. I was using concussive strikes, but something like this is really great. The reason I'm using the Insatiable Fury, though, and I think it is going to be a little bit better for this build, is because of the damage reduction while fortified. Damage reduction, not something super easy to come across. We're going to want as much of it as possible. If you can get a greater affix damage reduction while fortified, Insatiable Fury, I think that would be incredible. And the plus ranks to our werebear skills does give us around, with +3, around a 12% damage multiplier for all of our skills. So pretty nice there as well. And it's 100% uptime versus something like concussive strikes or ballistic does a waiver a little bit. Next up on your gloves, you're really looking for crit chance, attack speed, and then ranks to Pulverize. I have resource cost reduction as a greater affix. Just something that I rolled. I would prefer to have attack speed. Do not sleep on attack speed on this build. Attack speed is one of the biggest things that will help you push your clear speed and your damage, because the more Pulverizes that we can send out, the better. Pulverize is something that when it overpowers is going to be dealing a bazillion times more damage when it doesn't, and the more times that you're pulverizing per minute, the more like overpowers that you will get. So attack speed is really nice. I've got crit chance and resource plus ranks to Pulverize. And then for the tempers on your chest piece, we're looking for Earth crit chance and chance to stun is going to be the best for us. Earth crit chance is really important for this build because we are going to be getting a ridiculous amounts of damage multiplier when we are critical striking on this build. And it's not actually that hard if you get lucky with your tempers to get almost 100%. You can actually overcap crit chance on this build, which we'll talk about in a second. But if all of your Pulverizes are critting and all of them, when they overpower, are critting, your damage is really going to scale up a ton. So Earth crit chance is a lot better than any sort of like additive increase that we could get, mainly because the additive damage, we've got so much on this build, and the multipliers when we're critting are going to be much better for us. So definitely look for Earth crit chance on your gloves. Next up, for your pants, I opted for some like max health armor pants. You'll note right now I'm at under armor cap, which is a bit of an issue. I do need to like re-roll the greater affixes on this to hit that armor. But note that when I'm in bear form, I get 46% increased armor right now with Insatiable. So I am overcapping armor by quite a bit. It's just that Insatiable is giving me armor cap, just not while I'm in bear form, which is a bit of an issue. It is something that I need to fix on this setup. But I would try to greater affix that armor, and then we'd be all set. And I've got chance to immobilize. Ideally, that's chance to stun. Stuns are going to be really great for this build because we've got a lot of effects that enemies are stunned. Immobilize isn't as bad, but stuns enemies can't attack. Immobilize enemies just can't move. And then we're going to be using the Tacits of Might, which allow us to give us DR whenever we hit an enemy with a basic skill. We will be using a basic skill on this build. We'll talk about that when we get to our skills, but 20% DR for 7 seconds is really fantastic. We're stacking up tons of DR on this build to be really healthy, and when we're healthy, we're getting tons of extra damage. Next up on our boots, you're really looking, if you're going to be using Insatiable Fury, which once again is not required for this build at all, you really want Spirit per second, greater affix on your boots. Movement speed, max life is all great. Willpower is also nice. And then chance to stun and more movement speed. And then we're going to be using Metamorphosis because we need a way to get unstoppable on this build. So Metamorphosis is the best in slot aspect for us. The Spirit per second on your boots isn't as important if you're wearing a like normal chest piece with Spirit per second, but if you're not, you really need it. It's super important for this build. Next up for your weapon, the best in slot weapon will be a staff for this build. I unfortunately didn't have any good staffs, didn't have any greater affix max lives, but I did have a willpower, overpower, max life mace. So that's what I've been rocking right now. The reason the staff is going to be better is because we need 150% damage to crowd controlled to max out our Earth and Devastation node. You'll note that I'm only at 116. Once again, only been playing this build for a day. Don't have the best gear. But in order to get max Earth and Devastation, we need 150% damage to crowd controlled. A staff would give me 35% extra, so we'd be right around there. And then as soon as I upgrade this ring, I would be there. So staff is a little bit better. The multiplicative damage from Earth and Devastation, which once again, friendly reminder, is this node. It's going to give us a damage multiplier based on our damage to crowd controlled. Staff is just a better option because it'll make it easier to get that multiplier. Next up, we're going on our weapon, Earth crit chance. It's possible to get over 20% pretty easily if you crit on a Earth crit chance. That's ridiculous. 20% crit chance on just your weapon is absurd. Note that I don't have this thing at 12 out of 12 yet. Ideally, you're just hitting Earth crit chance like 3 times on the crit here. And then Petrified Duration is actually what we're going to go for the temper. Now, Pulverize size is the temper for Pulverize this season. Pulverize size only impacts the base of the Pulverize. It doesn't increase the AoE of the Shockwave, so it is nice because you do get a little bit more overlap with the Pulverize size and the Shockwave, so it's fine to go for that. I think Petrify Duration is actually better though. The reason for that is Petrify is a massive damage multiplier for us. We are going to be critting. Currently on this build, I think I've got like 65 to 70% crit chance. Petrify is going to give us that 7.93 seconds right now, about 8 seconds of this damage multiplier for crit on enemies when we are using it in mobs. But it's almost, right now, I've got a low roll on it, it's almost 14 seconds of 50% crit multiplier on bosses, and we're going to be being able to cycle Petrify pretty quickly because we're going to be shapeshifting. So think of this as if you like crit on it, you could get this multiplier up as a 50% damage multiplier for your entire fight on bosses, and that is so massive. The reason I don't think the like Pulverized temper is as good is because it's not really going to help with bosses, right? And Pulverize's issue is bossing. Petrified Duration is going to give us better boss damage uptime, and that's why, in my opinion, it is the better temper. Moving on to our amulet. My amulet sucks, to be honest. This is actually my tornado amulet. I just don't have a better one right now. But the big thing that you're going to want to look for is ranks 2 in Venom. In Venom, you already know what it is. It gives us a 30% crit multiplier. Those +3 ranks, you could get this up on like a really cracked amulet to like +7, which would just be an absurd amount of damage. Once again, it's crit damage increase. We're critting all the time on this build. And then ideally, the temper that you're using on this is more Earth crit chance. Earth crit chance is exactly what you're going to be wanting because, once again, when we're critting, we're going to get that way more damage. We have so much additive on this build. We don't need more additive damage, and so that's why you're going to want to look for more crit chance. Make sure that all of your attacks are critting, and then resource generation is probably what I'd go for. You want a lot of resource gen on this build. If you can get ranks to quick shift, attack speed, movement speed, all of those things are great. Quick shift just got buffed, so it's a ton of damage multiplier for us. So getting ranks to this is huge on the amulet. Ranks of Defiance is pretty nice. Ranks of Nature's Reach can be pretty solid. Ranks to Wild Impulses can be pretty solid, but I think the God Roll amulet is Envenom plus quick shift and then probably attack speed. And then we're going to be using the Shepherd aspect. We'll talk about our damage aspects in a second. Let's finish our itemization. Then for our ring, big option on the ring is the lucky hit chance to make enemies vulnerable. Vulnerable is a 20% damage multiplier. We actually have quite a bit of lucky hit on this build when we're pulverizing whole packs. So this is our only uptime on vulnerable that we really have. So getting a lucky hit chance, greater affix of it, really nice. Then you're ideally looking for like max life and then either crit chance or attack speed. You need one roll of damage to crowd controlled on a ring if you're using a staff. And then we've got some resource cost reduction or resource generation. I think resource generation is technically the better stat. It's just resource cost is what I rolled. And then I've got another ring with max life, crit chance, overpower. I would change this overpower damage if I could, or if I would. I should do it. I actually don't have any reroll resources right now, but I changed that overpower damage to attack speed. I think max life, crit chance, attack speed is your best in slot ring for this other slot. Attack speed is huge for just increasing our overall DPS. And then more earth crit chance and resource cost reduction or resource gen. I wasn't lucky enough to roll earth crit on this ring, so I've got earth damage, kind of a wasted roll. I need to find a better ring. For our damage aspects, we're going to be using Shockwave on the weapon. This is a increase to the base damage. Pulverize creates a Shockwave that travels forward, dealing 200% of its damage to his targets on his path. This we want to be the biggest number possible because this is going to get applied before the multipliers. So all the multipliers are going to be basing off of our base damage, and this increases that base damage by the most. So Shockwave on the two-hander is the best option. Then we're going to be using Shepherd on the amulet. This is a ridiculous multiplier. It's been broken since a long time now. It's used on most builds that are based on core skills, and it's no exception here. Ridiculous amounts of damage. We're getting 90% multiplier on our amulet just from using our 3 companion skills. Then we're also going to be using Changeling Debt, which gives us a 55% increased damage to enemies when they're poisoned. We're going to be poisoning enemies with Poison Creeper and Claw. So we've actually got really good uptime on poison, which is really important because we're going to be using Envenom. And Envenom is also a big multiplier. And then the last thing that we're going to be using is Retaliation. Now, there's a few options for this aspect. You could use Aspect of Retribution, which gives you 30% increased damage against stunned enemies, and it double dips on bosses when they're downed, so you get 60% damage on downed enemies. I found that the uptime on that is really bad in high tiers of pits because you're fighting the boss and they basically kind of start to become unstoppable, or like they just don't get stunned very often past your like first 2 stuns. So I didn't like that. For low tiers of pit, that aspect feels nice. And the other option here is the aspect of the Stampede. That gives you 45% increased damage, but it's added on top of Shepherd, which means that it's not its own separate multiplier. It's just added on top of it. So it's actually only increasing your damage by 23%. If we do our 1.35, we get double of it. So it's 2.35 multiplier when we have Stampede on. And without it, we have 1.9. So this is us adding the damage versus not having it. And the actual percent increase when we multiply that by 100 to get a percent is only a 23% damage increase because it's not its own separate multiplier, and multipliers multiplicative with each other. So Retaliation is actually more damage than if we were using Stampede because it's really high uptime on Fortify on this build, and it's its own separate multiplier instead of being added with Shepherd. So Retaliation is a little bit more damage. It's not you can argue that it doesn't have as much uptime as Stampede. So if you're feeling like you're not fortifying enough on this build, you could definitely run Stampede, but technically Retaliation is the bigger damage increase aspect on this build, so that's why we're using it. Lastly, one thing to bring up is the Banished Lord Talisman. Now, if you don't have a good amulet, you could use this, but I think a actual good rolled Envenom amulet wins every day over Banished Lord. The reason for this is because we can get Envenom on our amulet, which is a 30% damage multiplier. Just putting Shepherd on our amulet is another 90% damage multiplier. Plus, we can get something like Resource Generation. We can get Earth Crit, plus more crit chance, plus attack speed. The damage of a good rolled amulet is just simply better than Banished Lord. Banished Lord will give you more consistency in your overpowers, getting another source of overpower, but the damage just isn't there, to be honest. So if you don't have a good amulet, I'd recommend rocking Banished Lords. But if you do have a good Envenom amulet with like crit chance, attack speed, earth crit, any of these things, it's just more damage than Shepherd, or it's just more damage than Banished Lord could be. Next up for our Spirit Boons, we're using Wariness. Now, if you're speed farming Hell Tides or just want to speed farm like 100s on this build, go Advantageous. They just buffed this to give us more movement speed, so this is really nice. But if you're pit pushing, make sure to put on Wariness. But yeah, this is kind of a situational thing that you can swap whatever activity you're doing. I'm just going to leave it on Wariness for now. Next up, Iron Feather. More max life, more damage, crit. We are critting all the time on this build. You could go Avian Wrath if your attack speed's really suffering, but sorry, you could go Swooping Attacks if your attack speed's really suffering, but I think Avian Wrath is just the better option for another crit multiplier. Pack Leader, we are lucky hitting a lot on this build. I'll talk about that in a second, but we want to be resetting our Poison Creeper as much as possible so that our poison uptime is as much as possible. And they just buffed Obsidian Slam, so this is fantastic because every 10th kill will give us guaranteed overpowers, so we're getting double or as often overpowers from Obsidian Slam. For our skill tree, we're going to be rocking Claw plus Claw poisons enemies. This is guaranteed uptime on poison. Remember that uptime on poison is so massive for us because not only is Envenom proccing from that, but we also have Changeling Debt. So the difference of hitting a poison enemy versus a non-poison enemy is kind of crazy. The other reason we're going to be using Claw is it is going to allow us to shapeshift a lot with this build, which gives us that 24% damage multiplier. We don't want to just be a bear on this build because Quick Shift is fantastic and Heightened Senses is lots of DR and movement speed, so we want a way to shapeshift into wolf form. I was originally using Blood Howl. Blood Howl was nice, but I think Claw is the better option, and it gives us that might aspect that we get to use for another 20% DR, which once again, while we're healthy, we get more damage, so all good things. Next up, Pulverize. We're going to get Raging Pulverize. This 30% increased overpower damage and guaranteed stuns is fantastic. Wild Impulses for more core skill damage. We're grabbing Iron Fur for the more DR while in Werebear form. We're not using a defensive skill on this build. Once again, we've got so much DR that we just don't really need a defensive skill. If you're really struggling, you could slap on Debilitating Roar. I just don't think it's a better option. We're really trying to get as much damage as we can here. We're going to be grabbing Nature's Reach, which just got buffed. Now this is a 30% damage multiplier against stunned, immobilized, or knocked back enemies that are distant, which a lot of times in dungeons you're hitting distant enemies all the time. So Nature's Reach, fantastic here. Now I didn't go Clarity because I'm not trying to like with this build. A lot of times it's kind of like a little bit of a battle against things, and I found that Clarity is nice for those like kind of like big montage hits to get the most damage out of. You pop all of your things and then you can get a guaranteed overpower. It gets a 45% damage multiplier. That feels really great, but it just didn't feel as good for pit pushing because just spamming Pulverize, getting up our attack speed, and doing as many Pulverizes as we can per second seemed like the better option. So if you want to try to like one-shot a Duriel or like for my Lilith kills, I was using Clarity so that you would get a little bit more damage there. It's not as important to get like Nature's Reach for something like that, but I just think that the better DPS option is not having to do all these things, cast a Pulverize, all these things, cast a Pulverize. Just spamming Pulverize felt better to me, so that's why I'm not using Clarity. Then we're going to be coming over grabbing Stone Guard. We don't really care about Crushing Earth. Yes, it's more damage against slowed, stunned, immobilized, or knocked back enemies. This isn't up all the time against bosses. This Stone Guard is. That's why we're prioritizing this. We just need 1 point in Safeguard. We're getting tons of Fortify from Safeguard. 1 point there is enough. They buffed up Mending Stone, so now this gives us more healing from all sources and 12% increased max life. So that's massive. Provocation just got buffed, so this is even more overpower uptime for us. We're grabbing Envenom for the crit multiplier against poisoned enemies. We're grabbing Circle of Life so that while we're spamming Pulverize, we're going to be healing for lots of our HP. Defiance for more damage multiplier against elite enemies, Quick Shift for more damage multiplier, Heightened Senses for more DR, Petrify for all of the damage and crit damage that this is going to give for us. And then lastly, we're going to be using Ursine Strength. I think Ursine is just better than Bestial Rampage, to be honest with you, mainly because the 20% max life, and we're getting 60% multiplier, the 30% health, and the 30% overpower. Bestial could work with this build. You know, we are shapeshifting enough for it, but I just prefer Ursine. We get the healthy, we get the damage. It just feels better to use Ursine, and it feels better to get as much HP as you can on this build. And lastly, they just buffed defensive posture, so now this gives us 15% more fortify and even more DR while fortified. Once again, another source of DR for us. This is fantastic. So for the Paragon board, this board is straight from Maxroll. Shout out to Boiler, who came up with this board. Boiler is another Druid writer for Maxroll, and he is fantastic at making Paragon boards. He's really, really good at it, and this Paragon board is amazing. So to start us off, we're going to be using Spirit in the first glyph. We're going to be increasing our crit damage here, and we're going to get a crit multiplier whenever we're critting enemies, which is all the time on this build. Then we're going to go up to Inner Beast. Inner Beast is Spirit cost reduction, so we can spam Pulverize more, but it also, whenever we're shapeshifting enough, we're going to get resets to get Petrify up. And remember, we're tempering Petrify duration on this build, so Petrify's uptime, if we're Inner Beasting enough, we'll be able to stay up pretty often on bosses, so this is a really important node for us. We're gonna grab all of the max life nodes. Remember, max life is damage for us on this build. Havoc for more crit damage. Then we're gonna be going over to the Earth and Devastation board. Once again, I don't have a staff. A staff would get me to like cap on Earth and Devastation. And we're also gonna grab Oppress to get more damage to crowd controlled enemies. We're putting Fang and Claw here, which is gonna give us a 150% bonus to all magic nodes, which gives us bonuses to our resistances and also our Earth crit, so perfect placement there. The board you're going to want to go up to in our fourth board is going to be Ancestral Guidance. This is going to give us a damage multiplier after we're spamming our Pulverizes, and we're also going to be putting Outmatch to get more core skill damage, more resistances, more willpower. The way that this build is set up is so that you get basically all of your resistances from just the Paragon board. The only thing that you need to use is diamonds in all of your gear, and you'll see that I'm 2% over shadow resist, 2% over poison, 2% over cold. I've got a little bit of lightning res, and I need to roll off my fire res on my pants. Oh, I actually did that. So yeah, all you need to do is put diamonds on this build, on this Paragon board, and you will have all your resistance capped easily. You don't need a single resistance roll on your gear, which is awesome because that also saves us from putting, we can just slap on as much max health as possible. In Ancestral Guidance, we're also going to make sure that we grab Reclamation and Natural Attunement. This is giving us lots of extra spirit so that we can spam Pulverize. These are all very important nodes to get as much Pulverizes out as possible and not have spirit issues on this build. Then we're going to be coming over to Constricting Tendrils, where we're going to be putting Earth and Sky. Earth and Sky boosts all of our magic nodes, and we're going to be putting all of this on the max life nodes. So we're getting tons of max life here. This like gave me, when I spec'd this Paragon board, like over 12k more max life than my previous Paragon board, mainly because of this strategy of putting Earth and Sky on all of these max life nodes. We're getting even more nature magic damage. And then lastly, we're going to be working our way up to Survival Instincts, which is going to give us another damage multiplier based on enemies' health compared to our health when we're fighting them. Bulwark for more damage reduction while fortified, and then we're going to be slapping Tectonic as our last glyph. Now, Tectonic is an interesting choice because it gives us more lucky hit chance, which you might be confused on. Why do we need lucky hit chance on this build? We need lucky hit chance for a few things. Once again, it's going to give us more consistent procs of Pack Leader. That's really important, but it is also going to build stun up on bosses faster because of all of our lucky hit chance to stun, lucky hit chance to immobilize, and it's going to give us better uptime on CCing those enemies, which gives us more survivability. So lucky hit chance and Tectonic is actually pretty perfect for this build. You could, if you wanted to, if you're feeling squishy on this build, put in the Werebear glyph so you get a little bit more DR while you're in bear form, but we're getting so much DR outside that we were able to kind of just go for all damage multipliers on our actual Paragon board. So all great things there. Guys, that's going to do it for the video. I hope you enjoyed. No, I don't have the best gear, and yes, I've only been playing this build for one day, but I think if you implement these strategies and itemize how you should on this build, Pulverize is going to be probably our best speed clearing, like T100 build. And the reason for that is Pulverize is just really good at clearing things quickly. I talked about this on stream, but one of the big things about Pulverize is it's a much better speed farming build than it is a pushing build, just off the simple fact that Pulverize is able to snowball. When you are hitting enemies and killing them in like 1 to 2 pulverizes, you can basically keep up Obsidian Slam all the time, and this allows you to just have some of the best clear speed possible for high-level pits that Druid can do. But because Obsidian Slam is very temperamental and based on kills, as you start to push higher and higher, the build starts to feel a little bit worse because, you're starting to lose those overpowers. You're not snowballing as hard. And when you're getting Obsidian Slam chains into more kills, which chain into more kills, which chain into more overpowers. And so this build feels really comfortable for just blasting high-level pits. It's not going to be the Druid's best pushing build because of how Obsidian Slam, how Overpower works. There are going to be better pushing builds than this on Druid. However, in terms of just a comfortable, high health, really big damage farmer, Pulverize is in actually a great state now, and I'm really happy with these changes. And that's going to do it for the video, guys. I hope you enjoyed. I'll catch you all on the next one. Take care. Peace.